sexy bus dropped off. It's you! Hello, and welcome to this new set of videos which I'm going to review some books, mainly things like non-fiction, self-help type books, you know, that sort of thing. So today we're going to start with this. Atomic Habits by James Clear. So this is a run-of-the-mill self-help book, and it's about making new habits that are hopefully better than your old habits of doing things like eating junk food or procrastinating or any of those sorts of things, and turning them into good habits like exercising or like knowledge work, you know, learning something, you name it. We generally know what's good and bad for us, but this book deals with how you actually put those things into action more consistently. I have to admit, I like the way the book opens because it does talk about what it means by atomic and what it means by habit. So it says here, atomic, an extremely small amount of a thing, the single, irreducible unit of a larger system. And a second definition here, the source of immense energy or power. Pretty good start. Habit, a routine or practice performed regularly, an automatic response to a specific situation. So when you combine those things, you get the title of the book, Atomic Habits. Now I'm going to look at this book from a psychological perspective, not just like, did I like reading it, you know? So with that in mind, if you guys have other books you want me to read and give like a psychological review of, then please let me know in the comments below. Let's get into things. So the TLDR is, I do like the book. It's quite actionable, it's quite easy, and it is informed by sound psychological principles. However, it's not perfect. So let's go through it based on its 4 central concepts. And in the book, these are defined as 4 laws. So law number 1, make it obvious. Number 2, make it easy. Number 3, make it attractive. Number 4, make it satisfying. And there is some stuff at the start and the end about kind of, you know, getting you into these habits, and then also making better versions of the habits, like advanced habits, stacking up habits, blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to focus on the 4 main ideas from the book today. Okay, so starting with number 1, make it obvious. Now for me, in psychological terms, this was very behaviorist. So it's kind of a cue, response, reward model. So heavily informed by the likes of Ivan Pavlov and B.F. Skinner. So that's classical and operant conditioning there. The idea that classical conditioning, the more times that we have stimuli kind of associated together, you know, every time I see A, I also see B. You know, every time if I take B away then and just see A, I am expecting B. This is your classic, you know, ringing a bell and the dog salivates. Maybe I'll do a separate video explaining that fully. But essentially, we associate things together psychologically that co-occur more often than not. And then operant conditioning, which is your classic reward versus punishment behavior model. If you want to train a dog to do something, you can reward it, and it's more likely to do that thing because it wants the reward. If you want to train it out of something, well, I don't actually advise negative reinforcement, but rather than you take away the positive, and you're less likely to see that behavior. So the main idea here is there is a cue and there is a response behavior to that, and hopefully there will be some reward afterwards as well, and that's supposed to enhance the habit formation. The example which stuck out for me in the book is if you want to go to the gym in the morning, you put your gym clothes out at the night time, so when you wake up, there's the cue, your gym clothes are already ready, it's your gym bag, it's something like that. Maybe you've meal prepped your, you know, pre-workout meal or your actual pre-workout to give you a boost of caffeine or something. So essentially you're setting up a cue in advance, and it makes the response behavior much more automated. Do this enough times and it will become a bit more habitual for you. Now, the second part of that is that there is a reward element as well. So the more that you reward good behaviors, then you're more likely to do them in the future. Again, let's stick with the gym example. So when you've been to the gym, maybe your reward is something like a high protein snack, which is still healthy, but tastes very nice. A protein bar or a cookie or a protein cookie, that is. Almost caught me there. Or a shake or something like that. So something which is still in line with the ultimate goal, which is your health and going to the gym and things, but it feels like a reward. So you've not only cued the behavior, you then did it and you reward yourself for that behavior. Solid psychological principle, it's basic behaviorism. Thumbs up from me. Okay, law number 2, make it easy. I'm actually going to blend this one a little bit with something that comes from the intro to the book about your personal identity. So I'm going to combine 2 ideas here. The idea that you want something that's worth doing and you like the sound of, but that inherently, if that is part of your self-identity, you're more likely to stick to it. Now, there's a lot of literature out there about the self, but this is really based on 2 basic ideas. The first being cognitive dissonance, and the second being self-perception theory. So cognitive dissonance is a phenomenon where you feel uncomfortable when your thoughts and your behaviors aren't quite lining up. As an example, I want to quit smoking. I know smoking's bad for me, but I'm still smoking. Okay? So every time I'm having a cigarette, or when people say to me, oh, I thought you were quitting, and that it's that uncomfortable psychological feeling that you gain. It's called cognitive dissonance. Self-perception theory is a theory of attitude formation that suggests people develop their attitudes by observing their own behavior and then inferring what attitudes must have caused it. So if you're doing stuff, you're going to start believing that about yourself. So let's take, for example, health. If you tell yourself you're a healthy person and then you are doing unhealthy behaviors, negative habits that are having a detriment to yourself, again, you're going to have that feeling of cognitive dissonance, and your identity, your self, and your reality aren't going to match, and that's going to make you very uncomfortable. So the idea from the book is that you try and align these things as closely as you can. And the result of that is you're going to stick to that habit. Here's a fun fact about me and my life that you didn't ask for. I'm vegetarian. And when I cut out meat in my diet, I did this myself. I actually didn't say things like, oh, I'm trying to cut down, or, I can't eat meat. I would say, I don't eat meat. That's the phrase. I don't eat meat. So my identity was solid, it was concrete, and it wasn't going to change. And my words were really shaping my behavior. Similarly, if you're trying to quit smoking, if you're trying to quit alcohol, something like that, I don't smoke. I don't drink, okay? It's not simply I'm trying to quit, or I'm an ex-smoker, something like that, that's got the association with it. Draw a line in the sand and use direct language that is consistent with your new, potentially more healthy self-identity. So far, so good. Let's move on to point number 3. Make it attractive. This is an interesting one because I suppose we could think about the reward model from behaviorism that we were talking about earlier through operant conditioning. However, what I think is more attractive is if something is relatively easy to do and not things like time consuming. And this is where that whole atomic part really comes in. So breaking things down into their absolute smallest part can be super helpful. From psychological theory, this taps into behavioral momentum, but also self-efficacy by Albert Bandura. So self-efficacy is super interesting. It's the idea that we have our own confidence and belief in our ability to do something. This can be super, super difficult to establish, first of all, especially if the habit that you're trying to form is a drastic change in your lifestyle. And so this is where I think those tiny kind of atomic parts of the habit formation are really, really useful. The more you do small incremental habits, the more often you do them, the more consistent you are with them, you build up your self-efficacy. You build up that idea that, yes, I can do this, okay? It's very internal and it has a self-reinforcing nature. And you're going to be surprised, those tiny things really add up over time. The example in the book was from the British cycling team under the lead of Sir David Brailsford. And a lot of the time people talk about things like getting 1% better. Well, that was the tactic of Team GB's cycling team. They were making sure their seating was right. They were making sure the material they were wearing was correct. They were making sure that their sleep was a little bit better, that their recovery, their nutrition, their training was getting incrementally slightly better over time. Add all of these minuscule changes up consistently and over time, and what you have is like a compounding effect of that. So within a few years, the British cycling team were winning like loads of Tour de France, loads of Olympic medals, you name it. They were absolutely smashing it. They were dominating. And then finally, make it satisfying. Well, this one's, again, pretty interesting one. It does use some of the psychological principles we've already talked about. However, I'm going to use a different one here. I'm going to talk about Kurt Lewin's field theory. The idea that the area around you, the environment, can have an impact on your behavior. So there's the simple idea, put yourself in a different environment and you will behave differently in that environment. I think everyone understands that. However, you can also craft your environment. So if you want to do something like, practice guitar more regularly, or, some other version of skill that you're trying to up, well, make sure your guitar is visible in the environment. Make sure you've got music equipment there. And the good thing about this is we're going to take it away from the individual. I'm going to bring in social psychology realistically and bring in other people. When people come round to your house, they see the guitar and they go like, oh, do you play? Or, play us Come By Our Way, or something like that, So you're bringing in a little bit of social pressure onto the situation. Even better if your environment includes other people who are doing the thing, learning the thing. So yeah, join a band or do something similar. Have an accountability partner, as is worded in the book, who can potentially keep you on track when you personally aren't in the mood, but that's the plan. The plan is to carry on with the habit that you've started to form. So some of the strengths of the book, I think, are how it demonstrates psychological theories by using practical applications. It talks about behavior change in an easy to understand way, and it doesn't go too scientific about how a habit is actually formed. It emphasizes the importance of consistency and environmental design, and these tiny changes that are going to compound over time. Some of the instructions in the book sound a lot like cognitive behavioral therapy, so they are based in both cognitive science and also doing things, just behaviorism. A big idea I've not yet spoke about is something called cognitive load. Basically, if you've got too much mental clutter and you've made too many decisions that day leading up to that point, you're much less likely to be committed to a habit. In a lot of cases, it's easier to do the more negative but actually more destructive things like slobbing on the couch and watching TV all day, or eating all of your shitty foods, all of those things. So I think a big key idea of the book is reducing the cognitive load. You're trying to get to the point where you're just doing good things, you're doing positive habits for your life, and you're not thinking about them anymore. And so after a while, a few months, a few years potentially of doing these things, people are saying to you like, wow, how have you improved so much? You've done all of this. Like, do you not get tired? Well, no, because you're not thinking about it. This is habitual. And that's one of the big strengths of the book. Limitations of the book. Well, if you're looking for a deep dive into psychological theory, it is not that, okay? It is very pop psychology in its basis. And a lot of the ideas and indeed the theories I've told you here today are pretty old school. So they don't take into account things like our modern lives that are so easy to be interrupted by social media and notifications pinging left, right, and center. It also doesn't focus on personal issues like mental health, past trauma, emotional regulation, anything like that, which are big parts of whether or not we commit to certain actions. And I think it's kind of naive actually, and it makes one big error called a fundamental attribution error. The idea that people's behavior is massively in their control, and it sort of downplays, although it does mention environment, it really doesn't talk about how important environment is. It's the naive and privileged view that like, why aren't you better than you are right now? Everyone has the same 24 hours in the day, all of that. Yeah, well, we're not all fucking millionaires that got some massive inheritance and have all the free time in the world. I think there's a big gap in consideration for variety and socioeconomic status. Not every book can do everything, so I'll forgive it for that, So what's my overall take on the book? Well, generally speaking, it is grounded in sound psychological theory. I did enjoy it as a read. I got through it in sort of less than a week, kind of on and off reading it. And I think it's the sort of book that can be useful for the general population. You don't have to be a scientist to read this. You don't have to be a psychologist to read this. If you just want to get a little bit better and a little bit more clued up, it could change a few things in your life, and I think that's beneficial. Woo! Right, this has been a longer video than I expected. This has been a longer video than I've done so far on my channel, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. Like I said at the start of the video, if you've got any other books or recommendations for me, you want my opinion on, you want to know kind of is the science or the psychology legit or not inside that book, then please give me recommendations. I'd love to hear them in the comments. Stay beautiful, as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!